Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that all your debts, your mortgage, your student loans, your credit card bills, were simply erased. Sounds impossible, right? Well, for most of human history, this wasn't a fantasy. It was policy. Kings, emperors, and even modern governments have declared what we now call debt jubilees. Mass cancellations of debt designed to reset society and keep the economy from collapsing. Our story begins in ancient Mesopotamia more than 4,000 years ago. Back then, farmers often borrowed grain or silver to get through bad harvests. But when they couldn't repay, creditors could seize their land, or even enslave them and their families. Left unchecked, this cycle would destroy the free peasantry that kings depended on for soldiers and labor. So, kings like Hammurabi and his predecessors had a solution. Declare a clean slate. These were called Amagi decrees, literally meaning freedom. They wiped out personal farming debts, freed people from debt bondage, and returned land to its original owners. This wasn't charity, it was survival. By canceling debts, rulers made sure their societies didn't implode under inequality. This tradition echoed into the Hebrew Bible. The Torah commands that every seventh year debts must be forgiven, the Shemitah, and every 50th year, the Jubilee year, land was returned and Hebrew slaves were freed. Here, debt forgiveness wasn't just politics. It was divine law. The message was clear. No one should be permanently trapped by poverty or debt. Now let's jump to classical antiquity. In Athens, around 594 BCE, a lawgiver named Solon faced a society torn apart by debt slavery. His reform, called the Sisakthia, literally the shaking off of burdens, canceled debts, freed enslaved citizens, and gave Athens a fresh start. It was a one-time act, but it set a precedent. Sometimes you need to erase the ledger to save the state. Rome, on the other hand, resisted mass cancellations. Debt crises there often led to political conflict. The wealthy elite clung tightly to their rights as creditors. But in moments of crisis, even Rome bent. In 86 BCE, leaders slashed debts by 75%, forcing creditors to accept just a quarter of what they were owed. Later, under the empire, emperors like Hadrian staged dramatic acts of forgiveness, not for private loans, but for taxes owed to the state. He famously burned tax records in public, erasing the debts of millions. Coins were minted to commemorate this generosity, making sure everyone knew the emperor had given his people a new beginning. Fast forward 2,000 years. After World War II, West Germany was drowning in debt, owed not only for post-war reconstruction, but also for older obligations. In 1953, world powers gathered in London and agreed to cut Germany's external debt in half. This was the London Debt Agreement. About $7.5 billion simply erased. Why? Because the Allies had learned their lesson. After World War I, crushing reparations had fueled economic collapse and political extremism. This time, they wanted Germany stable, prosperous, and democratic, especially with the Cold War looming. So they forgave half the debt and made repayment conditional on Germany's ability to export. In other words, we'll let you grow first, then pay what you can. The result? The Wirtschaftswunder, the German economic miracle. It's a reminder that sometimes the fastest way to get paid back is not to squeeze harder, but to let the debtor breathe. By the late 20th century, it wasn't Germany, but dozens of poor countries trapped by unpayable debt. In the 1980s and 90s, many African and Latin American nations were spending more on debt interest than on healthcare or education. That's when the Jubilee 2000 movement began. It was a global campaign backed by economists, churches, and even rock stars like Bono, demanding debt cancellation for the world's poorest countries. They invoked the ancient Jubilee. If Mesopotamian kings could free their people from debt bondage, why couldn't the modern world do the same? And it worked. The IMF and World Bank launched the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, wiping out over $100 billion in debt for more than 30 countries. Uganda, Mozambique, Ghana all saw large portions of their debts erased, freeing resources for schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. And now we arrive at the present. In the United States, over 45 million people owe a combined $1.6 trillion in student loans. It's a modern form of debt bondage. Young people beginning adult life already chained by debt. Calls for relief grew louder, and in 2022, President Joe Biden announced a plan to forgive up to $20,000 in student debt for many borrowers. It was the closest America has come to a real debt jubilee. So what do we learn from 4,000 years of history? That debt jubilees aren't a utopian dream. They've happened again and again, in kingdoms, republics, empires, and modern states. Each time they were controversial. Each time elites warned of moral hazard. And yet each time society decided that survival, justice, or stability mattered more than strict enforcement of debt.